Theology on Tap online. We're so pumped that you guys joined us online here. For those who have never joined us before, this is going to feel totally normal for you. But for those who have come to Theology on Tap in the past when we were in person at Hubs and Hops, this is going to feel a little different, but we hope that you'll grab a pint, grab a cocktail of your choice, and join us for some rich conversation tonight.
Okay, before we jump in, tell us about Theology on Tap. What is Theology on Tap?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before we do that, I forgot to say who I am. I'm David Troutman.
Oh, who are you?
That's right. That's an even better question. Look, we're starting conversation out right. I'm David Troutman, and this is...
I'm Megan Troutman.
This is my wife. And so we have many years of practiced conversation that we're going to share with you tonight as we converse about conversation. So go ahead, Megan.
Okay, tell us about Theology on Tap. Tell us about your kind of vision for it.
Sure. So when we were kind of thinking about what we saw as a real need in our community here in Thomasville, we really felt like there needed to be a new space. We wanted to create a space, a sort of third space. Many cultures have these third spaces, which are a space that's outside of work and outside of the home, where the whole community can come together to gather, kind of public house, a place for the whole public to come and gather and have real conversation. So that's the second thing we want to do, is foster real conversations. Many of us see the same people day in and day out. But how often do we have real conversations about the things that matter most to us? How often do we do that? We're chatting or commenting or liking, but very few people are engaged in real and deep conversation with each other. And so we believe at Theology on Tap that real conversation about real issues can cultivate real relationships. And we want to see that happen. And so that's the last thing that we want to do here at Theology on Tap is we think that life is more interesting in community. We want to build a real community. Friends make life a whole lot more fun. Megan and I were friends for many years before we even dated or got married.
Yeah, I friend zoned him and then I let him out of the friend zone, actually.
I'm very grateful. But we want to provide a space where people can form new friendships and relationships and meet people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. And so as we were sort of relaunching Theology on Tap, we got a ton of requests to go back to one of our first topic for our first Theology on Tap, which is real conversation possible? And some of this that we're going to talk about tonight may sound familiar because you've heard me talk about it before, but the talks from here on out as we move through the fall are going to be all fresh speakers on fresh topics when we come in September. We're going to have Jonathan Groover, I'm real excited about this, talking about science and faith and whether these two things are compatible. We're going to have David Pusick from Moultrie coming down in October to talk about if God is so good, why is everything so bad? Who doesn't identify with that right now? And then in November, we're going to be talking about authority. So we've got a lot of really great, top-notch speakers and topics that we're going to be covering at Theology on Tap this fall.
Great.
So tonight, we wanted to talk about conversations, but we, as you know, if you've been to Theology on Tap, we love trivia and games. So we're going to start off with some trivia about conversation and how we talk with one another. And so you're going to see some questions up on your screen. And then choices for answers. And what we want you to do is in the comments on Facebook or YouTube, you can just put the question number and which and what answer you think is correct. And we're going to give you just really quick 10 to 15 seconds on each question to answer. So you got to be fast and put it in the comments. And whoever gets the best score at the next Theology on Tap, I'm buying you and a guest a free beer from Hubs and Hops on me. So the first question is this. What is the average attention span of a human being? The average attention span of a human being, is it A, 32 seconds, B, 24 seconds, C, 12 seconds, or D, 8 seconds? What do you think? Well, if you guessed D, then you were correct. According to a study that was funded by Microsoft, the average attention span has decreased from 12 seconds to 8 seconds over the last decade. So just for comparison's sake, the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds, longer than the average human being's attention span today. Megan, what's our next question?
Okay. In conversations between men and women, who talks most of the time? A, men. Do the numbers too?
No, it's good.
Okay. B, women. C, equal. Or D, children. Who talks most of the time? Men, women, equal amount, or children? Okay, there's a reason it's called mansplaining. It's because the answer is A.
So men dominate 54% of the time allotted in a conversation when it's a conversation between men and women. Okay, the next question. This is the third question. What is the average length people expect a normal conversation to last? A, about 5 minutes. B, 10 to 15 minutes. C, just under 30 minutes. Or D, more than 1 hour. What are your guesses? Put them in. Stick them in the comments. Well, the correct answer is C, just under 30 minutes. They actually set up this experiment where they took 2 random people, put them in a room and said, talk as long as you want. And whenever one of you wants to stop talking, you can stop talking and leave the room. And all of the conversations round up about just under 30 minutes. That was the time that people sort of expected without having any expectations for a conversation's length.
Those people don't talk on the phone with me.
That is true.
How many text messages are sent in a day? A, 100 million, B, 750 million, or C, 1.5 billion, or D, 6 billion. I'm guessing this is worldwide.
Worldwide.
Worldwide. 100 million, 750 million, 1.5 billion, 6 billion.
Okay, you got 5 seconds.
If you guessed D, you were correct.
6 billion. Just for, I think how many people are there in the world? 8 billion people, is that right?
Oh, really?
Let me know in the comments, whoever's out there. But I think basically there's almost 1 text message per person in the world sent every single day. That's crazy. Okay, our next question. How many words can the human brain process per minute? A, 800, B, 500, C, 300, or D, 100? What do you think? Well, anybody who has ever had a conversation and with a person while also having a separate conversation with another person in their head can tell you can process a lot of words at the same time. And so the correct answer is A, 800. The human brain is amazing. It's just incredible. It can process 800 words per minute. All right, last question.
What is the average rate of speech for an American per minute? How many words per minute?
Words per minute.
A, 50, B, 75, C, 125, or D, 250. Now remember, this is an American, not just Southerners. Important.
The average for all of America.
Average. The answer is C, 125 words per minute. So that's about more than double. Wait.
Yeah. More than quadruple of how many words we can process per minute. So that's one of the things that's challenging about conversation is oftentimes we're only getting 125 words per minute, but our brains wander because they're filling in all this extra space.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's
Well, we hope you enjoyed the trivia time, and whoever won will find out later at the end, and I'm getting you and a guest a beer, and if there are multiple winners or ties, then we'll figure that out at our next Theology on Tap.
So David, what is so important and challenging about conversations?
Yeah, conversations, as I said earlier, are at the heart of what we do here at Theology on Tap. We believe that conversations have the power to change us and change the world. But conversations can be also incredibly challenging, as you and I know, and as everybody else out there knows, that you can have some very challenging conversations because so often conversation can go awry through miscommunication or misunderstanding. Last summer, I was in Rwanda, and we were visiting a church over there, and the pastor, when we arrived, was very proud of his new Western flush toilet that he just had installed at his house. And he told us, my home is your home. Anytime you need to go to the bathroom, you can come to my house. And so it was very gracious of him. And so that day, I was in charge of the parachute game with these kids. And do you guys remember the parachute game from elementary school? You take the parachute, you go way up, and you come back down. So I did that. I went way up, and I came back down, and I knew that I was in serious doo-doo. I was in serious trouble because my stomach was making noises like I had never heard it make before in my life. And so I did one of those kind of like brisk walk, run, try not to poop your pants, make it to the house. And I made it to the pastor's house, and the front door was locked. But I remembered that he had a back door, so I ran around to the back of his house, and standing in the doorway was a woman from the village. And she was standing in the doorway, and I realized that I had to get past her to get to the bathroom. And so I said to her, excuse me, ma'am, can I please use the bathroom? And she looked like a very kind woman, and she just shook her head and said, no. And I tried to kind of express the urgency of the situation. I said, I really need to go to the bathroom. Can I please go to the bathroom? And she just smiled at me and shook her head and said, no. And so finally, I just had a stroke of inspiration. I said, can I use the toilet? And she said, oh, yes, please. And she immediately moved out of the way, and I made it in time, just in the nick of time for the fireworks to start. Now, why did I tell that story? Well, we always have some sort of barriers and pressures on our conversation. Not always those exact barriers of linguistic barriers, different languages, not understanding, that can make it extremely difficult to have a real conversation. That's sort of an extreme example, but we encounter that in every conversation we have, where we're miscommunicating and misunderstanding each other. And our culture that we live in has kind of given us two ways of operating in conversation: fight or flight. In our public conversations, we're so often trained to fight with one another. You see this in the political arena. You certainly see it on social media, in the comment section. You just read through there, and people are duking it out. And it's also started to form in us a sort of us versus them mentality. We're trained to fight in public, not actually have a real conversation, a real discourse. And then there's the flight response. And so in public, we have this like combative on social media, we're going to get the other guy. But in our private lives, we're often trained to be nice and polite in our personal conversations. And that too often means...
Don't talk about politics and religion.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. There's certain things you just don't ever talk about. And so what ends up happening is sometimes the things that are most important to us, we don't talk about with the people who are most important to us. We flee from those. We have that kind of flight response.
Yes. I wonder if there's a third way. Not fighting, not avoiding or running away, but actively engaging. given all these barriers and challenges, is it possible to have a real conversation where we don't get our back up?
Yeah. Yeah, I really believe that it is possible to have a real conversation. I wouldn't be giving this talk if I didn't. But I think what we really desperately need is we really need someone to teach us how to have a real conversation. And I've come to believe that that's what Jesus did. Jesus models for us conversation that's not based in terms of sort of fighting or flighting, of fighting with people or being fearful and running away, but active engagement in real conversation. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I think Jesus is such a great model for this is because in Jesus, God crossed the infinite distance and difference between God and humanity, between us and God. You know, at the very beginning of the Bible, God creates everything. If you go back to Genesis 1, he's creating everything by speaking it into existence. He uses words to create life. God creates humanity, us, to be his conversation partners. That's what Genesis 1 teaches us, Genesis 1 and 2. And the Bible refers to Jesus as the Word of God. Another way to translate that or understand that phrase, the Word of God, that Jesus is the Word of God, is that Jesus is the message of God. It's God's message to us. It's his conversation with us. In John 1:1, it says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then here's this amazing part, the amazing part. The Word of God, his communication to us, took the form of a human being. John 1:14 says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus is God's coming to us to have conversation with us. And that's why Jesus, God becoming a human, is so important, is that Jesus knew in order to communicate with us, in order to have us as conversation partners, we only really converse with other humans. And so God became a human so that he could converse with us, to be with us. As you read through the stories about Jesus, it's not just that he himself was God's message, but the way that he had conversations with people were just amazing. He regularly, all throughout the Gospels, has these amazing conversations with people from diverse backgrounds: the rich, the poor, people of different races and ethnicities, young and old, powerful people, people who are very poor, the popular and the unpopular. Now, I don't know, for those who are joining us online, whatever you think about Jesus, but I think one thing that all of us could agree on is that Jesus transformed the course of human history. He changed the world. And what I want to say to you is that he did that by having conversations with people. And so what we want to do is teach you just some methods and advice, not from us, because we are not experts, right, Megan? We are not perfect at conversation.
We like to talk.
We like to talk. That doesn't mean we always do it well. But we want to teach you some methods and advice from the sort of master conversationalist, from Jesus.
Okay, and as David was saying, I mean, you just think about some stories, John 4. Mm-hmm. When you go home tonight, you can look it up if you want. We can't go through it. It's a long chapter. But she comes at him with all this, well, you're a Jew. How can you talk to me? I'm a Samaritan. And he totally disarms all of these talking points that are constructed by the culture, just to cut through it, to have a real conversation about who she really is and what's going on in her life. So step number 1, be fully present, or don't multitask. To have a real conversation that creates a real connection, we have to be fully present. One of the biggest roadblocks to conversation in our culture right now is not just division, but distraction. We are never without our smartphones. A recent study has shown that the quality of the conversation, that is how the person, the people, the participants in the conversation rate the enjoyment of the conversation, was super negatively affected whether people were using or even holding their smartphones. If they were actually on their smartphones doing something, the conversation quality was rated very poor. We all know that. That's not surprising. But it even showed that when a phone was placed face down on a dinner table, the quality of that conversation was rated lower than when it was totally absent.
What did you say?
People felt less connected and less listened to. So don't multitask. Put down the phones and give your friends, family, and even strangers your full attention. Now, don't get me wrong. It's been super hard for me in quarantine because in some way it was almost like my connection to the outside world, really. So I am reflecting on this even as I say this, that I don't want to have it in my hand as much as I have been. Mm-hmm. Now, we got this question last year. I see that conversation is really important, but what if you don't want to talk to someone? Okay, guys, if you want to get out of a conversation, politely opt out of the conversation. We all have places to go. But don't be half in and half out of that conversation. From the beginning, God has known and shown that conversation requires being fully present. As David was saying, that's why God became human. There is no being in history, this according to our beliefs, you may not agree, but according to our beliefs, there's no one in history that met people where they were like Jesus of Nazareth. He fully immersed himself in our human experience. He experienced our joys, our sadnesses, our griefs, even death. The Son of God left all the comforts and all the privileges that were rightly his in heaven to come and walk mile upon mile in our shoes. How much more should we be willing to do the same for other humans? So be fully present, meet people where they're at, and give your full attention. It is the gift of presence that we give to one another.
So first is to be fully present. But once you're fully present, what do you do when you're fully present to somebody? So the second thing we want to tell you is ask questions. Ask questions. The best conversationalists are curious people. And they're always asking genuine, open-ended questions. Questions that don't just have one answer or yes or no. And things like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Tell me how you feel. As you study the conversations that Jesus had, he was always asking open-ended questions. Now, that's surprising to me because Jesus knew all the answers. So you would think, why is he needing to ask these questions? I think he asked these questions because he was a master conversationalist. He knew how to engage with people. So instead of saying, do you think this, which we can so often do in political conversations or anything where
Are you pro-choice or pro-life?
Right, that's a great example. You could ask, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Don't assume what they think. Ask them what they think. Leave the question open. Jesus did that all the time, and it always drew people out.
Point number 3, listen. The Apostle James wrote this, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Quick to listen, slow to speak. And also, we see this in the Chinese language. The verb listen, they have a character system. It's pictorial. The character for listen is made up of a composite of the characters for ears, eyes, and heart. You don't see mouth on there. So often we don't really listen. Sometimes it's a mental processing issue. I know that I am not an auditory learner, so it is extra hard for me. I work at it, and it takes practice. It doesn't come natural to me, but you can do it if I can do it. But sometimes we aren't really listening to others when they're speaking because we're thinking more about what we want to say. We're so busy focused on rehearsing what we want to say next making sure we get it right. We're so excited, oh, I thought of this cool story. I can't wait to tell it. So we're thinking about that, and we're not actually listening and processing what the other person is saying. We all do this. I am guilty as charged. So I like this. The prayer of St. Francis says, "Let me not so much seek to be understood as to understand." This line really challenges me. Seeking first to understand. This is so key for dialogue. Mm-hmm. But we so seldom see an example of this. Mm-hmm. My mother recently came to me exasperated because she has a neighbor who constantly pontificates about politics. The other person seems to think it is his duty to convert my mother to his way of thinking. Out of the blue, he will get up on his soapbox and give a diatribe without ever giving her the chance to respond. And when she finally musters the courage to share from her heart about one of the political issues that is really near and dear to her heart, he immediately kind of throws it down as a straw man or explains why it's not important. And I don't think I need to explain this to you, but, she doesn't necessarily want to have those conversations as much as she loves this person. And I think we can all probably relate to that a little bit. We all know what it feels like to go away from a conversation feeling condescended to and that we weren't heard. Jesus did not berate people with the truth. Jesus did not need to beat people over the head with the truth. So if he didn't need to do it, if he did it with gentleness and gently, slowly leading us with cords of kindness, how much more do we need to do that with other people? Jesus took the time to listen to their concerns. A woman comes to him and says, "My son is dead. My daughter is dying." He cares about their concern. And he also winsomely entertains their questions. I challenge you to find any part of the New Testament where Jesus gives a pat answer. It's often more questions or kind of coming around somebody's defense to get at a deeper truth. When we know someone is really listening, I think that's when we can finally lay down our shields, lay down our swords, stop going head to head, and start going heart to heart. That's when we can go from duking it out to walking side by side. Talk for a minute. We're in it together. We might not agree by the end of it. We might still be on different sides of an opinion. But I think feeling heard and not rejected or demeaned is what preserves the relationship. Feeling heard is what preserves the relationship. Not having to be identical clones of one another. And I think that's one of the lies our culture is teaching us right now.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the last point that we want to leave you with is the hardest, which is just this: be kind. You can be fully present. You can really listen to what somebody has said. But if you can ask great questions, but if you don't have kindness in your heart, it's not going to get you very far. Real conversation requires treating each person as a person, with all the good and bad that entails. The problem with an us versus them mentality is that we stop seeing other people as persons, and we start seeing them as a representative of a group, and ourselves as a representative of a group. The famous Russian author Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote this: "If only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." The problem is that we are not perfectly part of one team, and they aren't either. It's all of us that are in this together. Jesus had conversations with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, but he never treated them as representatives of their groups. He treated people like persons. He was kind to them. You know, the world is trying to push us into these false categories and groups all the time. What I want to say to you is, choose to stay friends, even if you discover that you completely disagree. People are not disposable. They are all persons worthy of love. You know, I can't help but wonder. Our country is facing incredible turmoil on top of the pandemic. And I can't help but wonder. I wonder if the officer who choked George Floyd to death, would he have done that? Would he have been so callous towards George Floyd's life if he'd had rich and deep and meaningful conversations with black men? I don't know the answer to that, but I wonder. I wonder if real conversations are possible and if they really can change us and change the world. You know, I know that's true for me. I know that it was the power of conversations that have changed my life. And so I believe in the power of conversation. And I believe that Jesus is the way that God wanted to start a conversation with each one of us. So I wonder, as I close, is there a real conversation that you have been avoiding, running away from because you were scared? Or are there people maybe that you haven't been fleeing from, but you've been going head to head instead of heart to heart? You've been fighting with them instead of actually having a real conversation. I invite you, learn these lessons from the master conversationalist, Jesus. So right now, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions about what we said, especially if you disagree. Ask us some questions in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. You can also text them to 229-231-4278. That's 229-231-4278, and we'll get your text messages. So go ahead and text them in to us, and then you can also leave comments on Facebook and YouTube, and we will see those comments. But we want to hear back from all of you. So what are the questions that you all have? Again, the number is 229-231-4278. I'm going to just check, see if we got comments here.
Quiet night.
Is anybody out there? Do you have questions? Did we stun you into silence? Don't be scared. If you want to, you can also send a private message to our Facebook page if you don't want to be outed publicly. The text message, I won't know who you are. So you can feel free to text it in. Well, while we're waiting, I want to say this was the last time we talked about this topic. One of the questions that came up was, what do you do when somebody's like super aggressive or rude with you and won't leave you alone with a topic? And kind of how do you deal with that sort of aggression? When somebody's sort of like you're having an intense conversation and they're like a dog with a bone and they don't want to drop it. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you can always have boundaries, and you can always say, you know what, I really value your friendship, and I think maybe we should stop talking about this right now because it's getting a little heated. And I think, honestly, sometimes you might need to do that with your spouse. You might need to say, you know what, we need to time out and go cool off. And come back together once we've regrouped.
Yeah, I think it's totally appropriate to have a boundary in a conversation. Just say, you know what, this is not going well. Let's take a breather. Let's take a time out. There's a reason why we have that term, time out. One other thing I would say that I think is really disarming to people is when you, in that moment where they're really coming at you, just ask them questions. Stop stating your opinion and just ask them questions about their opinion. People, it's not just narcissists that are narcissistic. We're all a little bit narcissistic. We love talking about what we think. But we got a few more questions. So asking questions is a great way to kind of diffuse those tense moments. Yeah.
All right. What is the easiest way to begin a conversation that you have already avoided?
So you've previously done the kind of flight thing and run away from a conversation, but now you want to re-engage with that topic. Is that kind of what the person was asking?
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, begin a conversation you've already avoided. So maybe there's, we all know there's certain things that are taboo, or certain things that maybe somebody's feeling got hurt.
I think it's a great question, because I think we've all had those experiences where something hasn't gone well, or we just kind of like avoided the topic, and now we realize that we really should have addressed it, and we feel like maybe we missed the moment. Here's what I would say is, you've never missed the moment, and it's never too late to have the right conversation. And what I mean by that is, I think just humbly acknowledging that this is an awkward conversation and say, you know what, the last time we talked about this, I was afraid and I didn't want to talk about it, but I really do feel like I want to talk about this with you. And just kind of putting it out there in the open, what it does is it allows people to relax. It allows them to start seeing you as like a real human being and saying, oh, this person like actually cares about me enough to be real with me. I mean, that's one thing I love about you, Megan, is I always know your love for me because you're real with me. And that means that you actually care about me and love me.
Can't help it, actually. But I think the other thing I would say is just a caveat that I am not afraid to talk about hard stuff, and sometimes you can let sleeping dogs lie, as the expression were. Sometimes I wish I had done that instead of digging up dirt, but this person clearly feels like now, if there's something, I can think of situations right now in our ministry that I'm like, you know what, it's been however many years, but maybe it's time to pick up that conversation that was just kind of not like avoided, but it's just swept under the rug. And
it's never too late to do the right thing.
It's never too late to do the right thing.
Yeah. What other questions?
But they said, I guess, but they said how. So I think the easiest way would just be, as Ava said, acknowledge that it's awkward, and just say, would it be okay if we talked about that again? And if they say no, you can respect their no, but you can kind of just make it open. All right, how can you start a conversation if you don't have open relationships with people who think differently from you already? How do you start a conversation if you don't currently have open relationships with people who think differently than you?
Yeah. I would say I think this is actually the biggest challenge in our culture right now, is that many of us surround ourselves with people who think like us, dress like us, act like us. And I think, the lesson that I take from Jesus is that Jesus was always willing to take his disciples outside their comfort zone. And so you see this. He takes his disciples and he leads them to enemy territory, to Samaria, or over to Tyre and Sidon, which were these like Gentile areas, non-Jewish areas. And he was always, kind of stepping out. And so what I would say to you is, I would say, look, everybody in our culture right now is kind of being bubblified. I don't know what they're being put into a bubble, right? I'm just making up words now. But they're being kind of put into this bubble. And it takes great intentionality to break out of that. It won't happen naturally. And so what I would say is, one, if you're a Christian, I would just pray and say, Lord, give me eyes to see someone that I could build a relationship with that's open and trusting, where I could have real conversations. I'm so grateful for the people who are different races and ethnicities from me that were willing to have real conversation and real friendship and real relationship with me over the years. And people cross genders, people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds, conservative, liberal, whatever. And so I just say it takes great intentionality to build those. And I would say just ask for eyes to see the opportunities to build those relationships with people who are different than you. And then when those people are different than you and they say things that are horribly offensive to your way of thinking, just say, this is a great phrase. Nikki Gumbel, who's one of my heroes, taught me this phrase, which is to say, that is so interesting. You don't have to respond or argue with people. You can just say, that is so interesting. And you can completely disagree. It's just very interesting, right?
That's right. That's right.
So that's a great way to start and build a relationship with somebody who's totally different, where you might be tempted to be reactive. Just to resolve in your mind, I'm only going to say, wow, that is so interesting, and ask questions. Yeah.
And I think David's talking about the bubble effect. No one should hear this talk as like a law that you have to go find someone very different than you and force them to talk to you. Yeah. They might not want to.
You will be my friend!
So don't go scare people. But I think, the other thing that makes it challenging, I think, to be real, let's be real, this is about being real. The thing that's challenging about being in a small town in the South is that when we are having conversations cross-racially, I think it is very common that I have seen that if you're the boss and you're asking your employee, what do you think about the George Floyd situation? They're in an awkward position where they're inclined to kind of tell you what you want to hear. So it's also a challenge because there isn't always an equal footing, and if someone is gainfully employed by you or really respects you, or you're somehow a leader in the community, it's going to be a lot harder for that person to be honest about how angry that made them, because we're all polite. We're all raised to be polite and to have good relationships with people. So that's another barrier that I've seen is it's just hard because sometimes there's a different footing, there's a power dynamic involved, and if my boss was like, hey, do you feel like this workplace is ever sexist? What am I going to say? Oh, no, it's great here, So.
Yeah. We got a really great question by text. We have several that came in from text, and so I just want to make sure we get to these. One of these is, how do you have a conversation when you are in fight mode and they are in flight mode? Here's what I'd say. You're not going to have a conversation that way. You're just going to be chasing the person, pummeling them in their back as they're running away. No.
We talk about this in marriage counseling sometimes. Yeah. One person will be like a rhino and the other person will be like a hedgehog. And that a lot of times they attract to each other. I am the rhino and he is the hedgehog.
She said it, not me. Just to be clear.
I want to hash it out. I don't want things to be left hanging. Yeah. And he's like, I don't want to fight. I like peace and harmony. But I'm like, but if we have a problem, I don't want to go to sleep with that on my heart. I want it to be solved.
Yeah.
So, But how do we do it?
Here's what I would say is the quickest way to actually get to a conversation, if you're in fight mode, is to get yourself out of fight mode. Because the person will not come out of flight mode until you get out of your fight mode. And so what I would say is it's in that moment when it's most necessary. If you can't do it in the moment, to do what Megan was saying and like say, you know what, I'm getting a little heated and I feel like I'm losing a little bit of control here. I think I need to just take a step back and relax. Why don't we start over and why don't you tell me what you think about this, or whatever. And invite them in. Leave openings. Stop expressing your opinion and start asking them theirs. And that is so powerful. It's so powerful when you see somebody restrain themselves and make space for you.
I think one thing that helps me as a rhino, I'm a fiery person. David may not agree with this. One of the things that helps me, I have to get it out of my system. I have to. So I will draft an email. I might not send it, and I'll just keep editing it, and I can just scream at the email page, and then I can kind of distill it until it's something someone could actually hear. But I was able to go through that process that I need to as a rhino, that I just need to spill my guts and I just need to do it with a screen and I need to type really fast. And then I can distill it out to something someone can hear without just totally putting their defenses up.
Yeah, that's really good. Actually, somebody texted that idea of making notes and writing things down, putting them out on paper. And I think that's a great method, particularly if it's not if you're taking notes right in front of them, it could be a little awkward, but doing that on the phone, or if you have an exchange back and forth via email or on Facebook or wherever. The last question, I think this is a really, really important
Wait,
question.
back to fight or flight rhino people. I just need the rhinos to hear this. What you need to do in that situation, if they're like in full turtle retreat, you are gonna have to give them space, and you're gonna have to respect that. But if it's not quite to that stage, that is when point number 2 is really great. Ask questions, draw them out.
Yeah.
Instead of going on your diatribe, deep cleansing breath, count to 10, ask questions that will draw them out so that you can hear what's actually going on inside.
So we had some more questions. We didn't get to them. I'm so sorry. But we are drinking an IPA from Hubs and Hops, and we enjoyed it thoroughly. So thank you, Hubs and Hops, for the beer this evening, keeping us well lubricated as we talked a lot. What we're going to do now is something that we've never done before at Hubs and Hops or at any Theology on Tap, which is we're going to have a Zoom table talk. So usually at the end of the talk and the Q&A, we have table conversations where it's a chance for you to talk with other people about anything that's on your mind or your heart. And so what we're going to do is we can't do that in person tonight, but we thought we're going to try to do this on Zoom. So what you're going to see on your screen is, and in the comments, is there's going to be a link to a Zoom call that's going to start right now. We want to invite all of you who are tuned in to join us on that Zoom call, and you'll be put into breakout rooms where you can have some table conversations with people about this topic. And so go ahead, click that link. There'll be a waiting room, and I'll admit you into it, just because there's all sorts of Zoom bombing craziness that's happening. But the link is in the comments, so check out that Zoom link. Come join us. We'd love to have a deeper conversation with you, now, instead of this just live.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. Let's do it.
Instead of us just talking at you and talking about it, let's actually do it and have a conversation. So we hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our next Theology on Tap will be at Hubs and Hops on September 29th on science and faith, and whether or not they're compatible. September 29th, Hubs and Hops, doors open at 7:30 p.m. Hope you'll join us then. See you on Zoom in just a minute.